You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. This is your host, Koku. It's a pleasure to have you joining us again. Before we get into today's show, I want to thank everyone in the Bitter Medicine Podcast Think Tank on WhatsApp for keeping the group going, sharing ideas, having a dialogue. I also want to thank those of you who follow us on Facebook. A lot of you have been stepping up your commentary on different social topics. And I want to thank those of you who have donated or even shared our GoFundMe page link to friends of yours. Really appreciate it. We're trying to make it to a simple $2,000 goal by mid-June, and the proceeds, which will be well documented. We talked about that in the past with folks asking for monies but not being fully transparent, so it will be well documented. We want to purchase some podcasting equipment and put some monies towards a social media marketing campaign that allows more people to be aware of our presence. So again, thank you for those of you who have donated, and thank you to those who have shared the link. If you haven't already, please go over to YouTube and subscribe. Hit the bell so that you can be notified when we put up new shows. As I mentioned on the first show of the year, we're going to be doing 2 shows weekly, and in some cases maybe even more, depending on what's going on that week. But at least 2 shows. So every Wednesday, every Sunday, there should be a new show that you can listen to on YouTube, or you can subscribe to us on your favorite podcast catcher like Podbean, Castbox, iTunes, and the like. Okay. In today's show, I would like to talk to you about the need for more Black folks to enter the STEM field of learning, which is your science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We need more STEM representation in the Black community. In fact, the Black community, when you talk about an African-centered curriculum or African-centered learning, central to that learning is the need to push more of our young people into, like I said, those areas called STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The reason why I'm pushing that thought is because the STEM field is responsible for over half of the growth of the U.S. economy since World War II. Let me repeat that again. STEM is responsible for over half of the growth of the U.S. economy since World War II. We as Black people tend to want to bow out of economics. We want to bow out of capitalism, especially in the so-called conscious community. We tend to think of capitalism and money as the devil, and blah, blah, blah. But the truth of the matter is, when you want to fight a system, you have to act like the system. So, if you see a boxer in a boxing match, you can't afford to be a wrestler in a boxing match. Okay? You have to be capitalist. And we have to start going for the bag now. The benefits of focusing on STEM based on the U.S. alone, if STEM is responsible for over half of the growth of the U.S. economy, then you have to believe and you have to be able to see the benefits of that. And you could see that the benefits of STEM of the STEM field is the creation of jobs with above average salaries. I can attest to that. You see more flexible jobs because jobs are now connected via the internet. So you see a lot of people who could be entrepreneurs, who can be traveling, who can be here, there, anywhere, and they're still doing business. They're still making money. You also have the phenomenon where STEM is concerned, science, tech, engineering, mathematics. You also have it where that field creates a lot of quality jobs that are inside and outside of the STEM field. So you see it has its kind of own ecosystem. It's like an industry, really. And the role of an industry is to create or to channel more funds to other related industries. So, for example, with the car industry is associated and channels funds to metallurgy or the metal industry. The car industry, because cars need tires, it channels money to the rubber industry. Cars run off of fuel. Obviously, money is fueled into the, no pun intended, but the fuel industry. So, if we now as a society within the society, if we started to focus our kids towards a STEM specific education, it can be African centered, that's fine. But if we keep our students in line, African centered education, but in STEM, and we teach them, like Carter G. Woodson advocated for, we teach them that everything they do is for their community, so race first, we can have over half of our growth within the U.S. economy be responsible for STEM since World War II. So you got to play the game. You have to play the game. And so we got a question, well, why is it there's so little representation of black folks in the STEM field? Now, in the last show, I mentioned that I have a business degree, and that's true. But before that, I have 2 degrees in science. I have 2 biology degrees. And I can tell you that there's a lot of black students majoring in science. Not as much as any other group, mind you, but because the STEM field is really dominated by white and Asian males. And for those of you who don't know, Asians are not just Chinese and Japanese. That includes what you call Indians and all that kind of stuff as well. There's a lot of black students in those STEM fields. In fact, most of my college buddies came through the STEM field as well. They were computer programmers. I was biology. A few other of the guys were biology. But when you look at where a lot of black students who are science students If you look at where they end up, to be very honest, most of them end up in teaching. And teaching is fine because you're teaching the minds of tomorrow. But that's not what's causing the economic growth. Not the teaching of the minds of tomorrow as much as the minds of tomorrow actually getting involved in creating small, mid-sized, even large tech startups. That's where it's at. You have to be pushing out the YouTubes, the Googles, the Facebooks, and when you do it, you got to be doing it in the mindset of creating an industry as well. You have to, whatever it takes to make those different types of technologies, you have to be getting it from other black folks with whatever components are necessary. This is what Amazon did. I could tell you as a tech student. Amazon, a lot of people would miss this, but before Amazon came out with the Fire tablet, Amazon was buying up all these little small tech companies that if they were trading publicly, their stocks were like $1.03 and stuff like that. They were buying all these little companies, but these little companies was doing research and development on and in areas that were to be the components or the component parts of the Kindle Fire. There was this one company Amazon paid big money for. I forgot how much millions, if not close to $1 billion for a company that was working on a new type of digital ink. And that's what went into their newer lines of the Kindle tablet. I forget what the original Kindle was called. And that's how you have to do it. That was white folks, Jim Bezos, Amazon, buying from other white folks without a doubt, and creating a little economy between white folks. We have to do the same in the black community. We have to start getting our youth, and even the adults need to get in on this now too, because there's so many outlets for you to learn technology now. You don't have to go to a college anymore. But we have to start focusing on areas of technology that we can create these little ecosystems within. And we can start putting out products where I may put out a major product, but it uses your components and your neighbor's components, and everyone makes some money along the way. That's really how we're going to get out of this. And also, the importance of the STEM field has to do with also in the research of medicine and therapeutic strategies for things that ail us. Right now, we take a lot of our medication and healing strategies from folks who don't look like us, who the research wasn't done tailored to our genetics. You know, Dr. Sebi always talked about that, for example, black folks in America and stuff like that do not eat an African diet, and that's what's killing you. We need folks to research this stuff. You've seen memes on social media talking about the soursop, which is a fruit you could get in Central America and the Caribbean, and South America as well, I think. You know, you've seen people talk about the soursop and how it has benefits in curing cancer. We need to have those folks from our community putting in scientifically relevant, scientifically accurate, using the scientific method. We need folks to research this and put this out there for the healing of our nation. So it's very important that we get more folks involved in STEM, in the STEM field, because really our life depends on it. Right now we have folks selling melanin for like $350 an ounce or something like that. We're not doing that. Who are they harvesting the melanin from? Who's doing the harvesting? It's not us. But they're getting it from us. So we have to do better in that arena, because that right there, the science and technology will get our economics booming if we start to push more people in it. You know, rap, music, entertainment, professional sports, that's all well and good, but the truth of the matter is there's like a lotto that controls that stuff. In basketball, how many guys do we see are great ballers on the courts outside, and they don't make it anywhere? Well, because number one, half of them aren't very educationally inclined, so they're kind of like stuck in the street type thing, and that has them messed up from going anywhere. Then even those who do push through and through high school, they can't even they don't have the grades to get into college. Those who even do get to college, so as we go through these different steps, these are filters that are making the numbers less and less and less. You get to college, depending on the program you're in, you don't really get the ball out, or your skills are not really up to par. You don't get drafted, and then you're struggling, knocking around overseas and this, that, and the other to try to get a lick. Or you go to the NBA and you're riding the bench and, you know, this, that, and the other. And by the way, by the time we've applied all these filters, we're talking about 1 in a lot chance of you making it to the NBA, to the NFL, to Major League Baseball. Let's forget about the rap game or R&B. I mean, how many dudes are making beats probably right now in an apartment somewhere here in Brooklyn who you'll never hear from? How many YouTube videos are there of guys, you know, performing who you'll never see on a big stage? So, and the reason that is because there are gatekeepers who determine who goes forward, who goes backwards in those fields. Now, to be clear, there are gatekeepers in academia as well, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But the thing about knowledge is, once you have knowledge, and this is where skill in terms of sports and stuff, or even rhyming or singing, doesn't have this restriction. I should say has this restriction. The thing about knowledge is that you can apply knowledge anywhere. Once it's in your head, the white man can't take it from you except to kill you. Once it's in your head, you can dream and visualize and make things happen in your community. But if you're a ball player who can jump real high and you blow your knee out, that's it. That's it for you in jumping real high. That's it for you in playing ball. You lose your voice, that's it for you. So we got to start becoming more knowledge-centered and stop relying on, you know, chance and probability. So I see it all the time. I adjunct teach in a college here, and number one, I adjunct teach in biology, and in a class of 24 students, you might see at the most 2 black men in those classes. You'll see more black women for sure. You'll see 2 black men, and even the black women are a huge minority in those classes. Especially those science classes that relate to pre-med, the black numbers are very low. You move up from general biology, because I was referring to general biology, you move up to something like microbiology, you often see no men. In a class of 18 to 24 students, there's no men. No black men. You go by the basketball courts, during the time those classes are happening, you'll see about 150 dudes. That's where our priorities lie. You go into a mathematics class, and you do see a black guy, he's sleeping. I shit you not. So we've got to do better. And the question always comes up, well, why are we so underrepresented? And I have some beliefs on and some things I've read on it. I'll talk about it on the other side of the bump.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAC Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Today, we are talking about the need for more black folks to be in the STEM field of education. For those of you who just joining, the STEM field stands for science, technology, education, engineering, and mathematics. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. The reason why we're talking about it is because STEM alone is responsible for over half of the growth of the U.S. economy since World War II. Okay? So it tells you what a sound investment STEM education is. And as I outlined in the first segment, the benefits of our society within the larger society focusing more on STEM. Number one, it creates jobs with above average salaries. You have flexibility in your jobs because they're technology jobs, they tend to be linked to the internet. So you have a lot of more flexibility, more movability. You're able to be here, there. You could be in America, you could be in Africa. And I'm going to talk about Africa heavily before this show ends. You could be around the world practicing your craft. And lastly, not only does it create STEM specific jobs, but it also creates jobs that are outside and inside of the STEM field. So, as I mentioned before, once you start creating these institutions of the STEM field, companies that are STEM focused, you're actually going to create and drive a power, an industry where, other related type jobs and even some non-related but fits within it are now going to come in. So, for example, you may open a STEM company, and right there you have this STEM incubator in a city. You're going to need people to come in who can clean the place. So you just created some housekeeping jobs. You need people to maintain the environmental system. So there are jobs for that. And if we keep in mind as a black force, as a black community, that whenever we buy, we always buy black, but we sell to everyone. We keep that in mind. We can create these little economic ecosystems throughout the black community that can now raise the average income for everyone in the community and lower the monthly and yearly job numbers of unemployment. As you know, blacks suffer twice as worse when it comes to unemployment and most other things than other groups in America. If the unemployment is 4.1 in white America, you're sure it's like 8.2 to 10% or something in black society at the least. So in this segment, I want to talk about some of the obstacles that are potentially in the way of why there's not more black representation in the STEM field. There is a claim that blacks have a lot of self-doubt when it comes to the STEM field and studying STEM in school. They're often discouraged by the economics of STEM, because STEM is something that initially you might not make huge money, depending on what area. You might not make huge money, but if you're business minded and you're thorough enough, you could land yourself in some nice pots of gold. Okay? And if you're thinking as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, even better. So you have self-doubt, you have the discouragement by economics, you have also mistaken perceptions of yourself as a black person. A lot of black folks see STEM professionals as nerds, socially inept, goofy, can't get a girl, can't get a guy type thing. Attached to that idea is they see a lot of, when they think STEM or they see advertisements about STEM, they see a lot of older white guys who again are goofy, kind of socially awkward. You think about Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, or in fact any one of those guys from The Big Bang Theory. You think Bill Nye the Science Guy. A lot of our people see those kind of guys as goofy, swagless, etc. We need to come up off that too. We need to come up off that. You see, the trick bag is that they have the rappers, the ball players, flashy, right? But you can have a good life within STEM if you work it right and if we work together as a community. I can tell you there are so many black children who think that sciences are hard. And academia doesn't help much, because academia is kind of a cold place, not just for black folks, but of course for black folks. But academia is a cold place. You're just a person. You're just a name. Sometimes you're just a number. And in academia, myself having been a black guy in academia, STEM student, very discouraging. When you go into a chemistry class, or like organic chemistry, and you sit in your recitation class, which might have about 25, 30 people in it, and you're the only black person. Meanwhile, the Indians are clicked up, the other Asians are clicked up, the Russians are all clicked up. Very, very discouraging, and it does take a toll on you psychologically. Sometimes you're in there and there's like one other black person who keeps to themselves, his or herself, or they might be struggling heavily and they don't last too long. Or sometimes they do okay, but There's no social interaction between you and them. It's a very cold place. So I understand some of the discouragement. This is why we at home have to encourage our people, our children, and ourselves to embrace one another more. You see, that's the problem when you're not race first, when you're not black first, you don't embrace each other in some of these spaces where other folks do embrace each other unapologetically. Lastly, as an obstacle, if we're being honest, a lot of black folks suffer from low self-esteem, especially if they're young, college age, high school age kids. You know, the system that we live under, the system of oppression, will do that to you. But again, like I said just before, if we start to teach unity amongst ourselves, start to teach that we have to embrace ourselves, especially when we're in Rome, so to speak, when we're amongst the beast, amongst our enemy, we have to learn to embrace ourselves. Put all that Haitian versus Bahamian versus African bullshit away. We got to start to say, hey, black man, I see you over there. Come over here. Or I'm coming to you. Or let's meet in the middle. We got to start working together. Because I'll tell you something, too, as a side note. When I was in undergrad as a biology student, something I always noticed was those other groups, those European groups, those Asian groups, they all had the exams. Let me repeat that to you. They had the exams. Black kids didn't really have the exam. Black kids might have an exam, just to keep it all the way real. Black kids and black student groups might have old exams that go back maybe, say you're doing the course this right now in 2018. They might have some exam from like 2009. And of course, the way academia works with exams and stuff is that, you know, there's only certain amount of ways you can ask a question. So yeah, some questions will be on that 2009 exam. But these other groups, they have the current exam. And my theory on that is this. A lot of these professors who teach these courses also do research, and they have a lot of students, again, who are European, who are Asian, etc., who are non-black. They have them in their labs, in their offices and stuff like that. And those students, those PhD students, those master's students, they're taking copies of the exams and they're giving it to their tribe. We, again, are so underrepresented in those. As you go higher in academia, from a bachelor's to a master's to a PhD, those numbers dwindle heavily. I once heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about it too. When he graduated from Harvard, I think he was one of two black folks graduating in 1980 out of 130. And I think of the two, he was the only one to get a PhD. So that tells you how lonely of a road he had. We just don't have a lot of encouragement. We don't have a lot of bonding and unity in those spaces. So it stands to reason why we suffer from our own part, our own doing. It stands to reason why we suffer in those spaces. Another important part of that is this. Let's say you're a black person, you go on and you get a PhD. You get a job somewhere, you have a lab. I can tell you without a doubt, the black folks who have a lab somewhere in academia have very little to no black students in their lab. Number one, it's hard for them to find them. I'll give them that much credit. Number two, they wouldn't dare to be pro-black and revolutionary on that level. They wouldn't dare to fill their lab with all black folks. Meanwhile, the Europeans in the same position who are principal investigators in research labs in academia, if the principal investigator who's European, let's say he's from the Ukraine. In fact, let's just say he's from Russia. He or she is from Russia. You can bet money 80, 90%, if not 100, of his students are going to be from Russia. His or her students will be from Russia. And they do that shit unapologetically. So this is also why it's important, because when you have the achievers like a Neil deGrasse Tyson or any of the kind of black folks who are in academia, who are PIs doing research and stuff like that in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, you leave them on an island. If there's any conflicts, guess who they have to sit before during a conflict? A bunch of non-black people. Guess how that's going to work out for them? 9 times out of 10. So the take-home message from these obstacles is that we have to inform ourselves, our young ones, that we can do anything. This is what Carter G. Woodson was talking about from a historical perspective. Because the education system doesn't show us doing anything, they show everyone else, the Greek, the Roman, the German, the European in general, the Asian. Because they only show these folks and they don't show us, we have this thing where we don't believe in ourselves. And the fact that they don't show us that stuff is intentional. Intentional why? Because it creates that low self-esteem within us. That low self-esteem will then mean that we don't challenge. We're not competitive in some of these spaces that actually drives and boosts economy. We opt instead to go and do stuff that we see has 75% black folks in it, but not realize how difficult it is for those black folks to even reach where they are. When if you are putting that same amount of drive into getting into the NBA or into the rap game or whatever, you'll put that same amount of hustle and drive and that same attention to detail, you could have been a kick-ass scientist, technologist, engineer, or mathematician. Who then could have corralled other similar folks and build this center or this ideology that's central to black economic growth. So on the flip side, I just talked about the obstacle that we create for ourselves to a great extent. We don't embrace the sciences. We hold a low self-esteem outlook of ourselves, and so we don't enter into that general arena. After we pause here for a station break, I'm going to talk about how the system fucks us too. Okay, so we'll be right back.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAC Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Hey, make sure hit the subscribe button so that you can be notified whenever we put up new shows. Right now, we're trying to get to a small goal of 100 subscribers. I think we're almost halfway there. Please share this podcast with your friends, family, loved ones, etc., like-minded ones as well. And let's try to get that goal so we can start working on branding this YouTube page a little bit more so we can hit a wider audience. So at the start of the show, I was talking about STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. I was breaking down how that has been so central to the economy of the U.S. since World War II. I was breaking down the benefits that affords the people, and if we took on STEM, this is what we could do in terms of building the black community's economy, giving ourselves more power, like Dr. Claude Anderson speaks about in Powernomics, because trying to go against capitalism is the wrong move. A lot of people want to talk about socialism and all that. In a perfect world, that would be perfect, but we're not in a perfect world. We got to fight the beast in the arena that the beast is in. So then I started to talk about the obstacles that we put on our own selves. A lot of it has to do with our self-esteem, particularly our self-esteem when it comes to recognizing our race first, being black first, uniting with other blacks in these academic arenas, forming closer bonds, and through those bonds, gaining a strength to power yourself through academia to the highest levels, and then using that knowledge again from a black first perspective to empowering your community by improving its economy. But in this segment, I want to talk about how this system of white inferiority complex, or some of you like to call it the system of white supremacy, the system also does a number on us too. As I stated before, I too, I'm actually a scientist, actually. I came through the ranks as a biologist, and more recently I decided to get a business degree to expand my knowledge so I could do some things in the business arena. But in the universities, if you've been a student who's a science student, you know what I'm talking about. But for those of you who weren't, take a listen to this. Universities turn out 2 times the number of minorities than leading tech companies hire. Let me repeat that for you. Universities turn out twice the number of minorities than leading tech companies hire. So that means that for all the science students you knew of in college, or for the science students who were in your family, who graduated with degrees, half of them will not and have not been hired by leading tech companies. And the leading tech companies we're talking about are companies like YouTube, Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So if only half of those people are being hired by those tech companies, what do you think is happening to the other half? And what do you think the result of that is for the community? The other half, and again, I would never knock teaching. I actually teach part-time myself as an adjunct at a local college. But when half of your technology people are shunned and locked out of leading STEM positions, most of those who are locked out are going to go into teaching high school. So they're going to give back to the community, which is commendable. But there's a problem with that. The problem with that is you're not taking that knowledge and focusing it on any type of innovation in your community that's going to drive economics to your community. Let me say that again. When you go to teach, you're not focusing on any innovation that's going to change the game for your community as far as economics go, that brings in money to your community. And if you're not doing it and the other man's not doing it and the other woman's not doing it, then you don't have that ecosystem I talked about earlier. You can't buy black to push your innovations and to then have that money spread around in within the community. You can't do it because you're teaching. What that also does from the kids' perspective is say, this person has a higher degree or level of knowledge in this area of STEM, but they're teaching for a teacher's salary every year. If you go back and look at the movie Notorious about the late Notorious B.I.G. or Biggie Smalls, there's a scene where Biggie he asks his teacher how much he makes, and the teacher at the time was making like $21,000 or something like that. And Biggie basically broke it down like, dude, I can make that in the streets in a way shorter amount of time. So what's happening is you get all this education, you're able to go and tell your students, well, I have all this knowledge in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, but I'm a teacher making a teacher's salary. I can just maybe afford a car, a little hoopty. I could get to work. I have a decent little apartment. Maybe after a while you get a house or something like that. You're not inspiring those students to want to pursue STEM. And the system knows that. The system does that intentionally. And the system is slick with it too. They know what they're doing, but you know what they will do? They will blame it on, like the big tech companies that I mentioned. They'll blame it on the qualifications of the black people with these degrees. Now, the last I checked, no matter what school you go to, a quadratic equation in calculus is a quadratic equation. Photosynthesis, which you learn in biology, is photosynthesis no matter what school you're learning about it from. Computer programming in a specific language is computer programming in that language in any other place. The one caveat I will give is some institutions, because they're deemed better than other institutions, like some private institutions, will give you more game on what's going on in the industry. So you will have more game that gets you in the industry better today. Whereas a lot of the public institutions, and again, this is all intentional because there's no reason why one can give you what's going on in the game and the other can't. But more public type education, they'll give you a general, in many instances, they'll give you a more general education. You could know your stuff there, but a lot of those little tools and stuff that you need to really penetrate into some of these tech sectors, you won't have that ability. On top of the fact you don't have the big dollar name of the institution. But of course, they blame the victims. They blame the qualifications. They go on and they'll blame, they'll say, we need to put more initiatives into education. That's just kicking the can down the road. Because you're not changing education across the board like that anytime soon, even if you tried. And they don't really try. Also, only 2% of tech workers are black in Silicon Valley versus the 4.5% of black students who come out of these universities every year. So again, that shows you that only half of them get jobs in the best of tech startups. A company like Apple actually broke code with some of the other companies, the other big companies, because a lot of those big companies like Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc., they kept their mouth shut on why there's so little diversity in those tech companies. Apple stepped out and said, the way to improve diversity is to improve the education. But again, I say that the education is more or less the same as what white and Asian males get. So again, that's the trick bag. The trick bag is that we'll blame education. But again, as I said, the number one is a number one no matter where you go. Pythagoras' theorem is Pythagoras' theorem. I could learn that in community college. You could learn that in Harvard. We learned the same thing. The only slight caveat to that idea is that the Harvard guy is going to get he or she is going to get pointed in certain specific directions to attain certain tools, or even if they don't attain tools while in those schools, they'll know to immediately get those tools once they leave those schools. But again, that's all a trick by, because you're not going to tell me that someone in a community college can't keep their ear to the ground and tell the students what you got to do come graduation. So it's that old game of always insinuating that, black folks just aren't that smart, just not that educated, just not that capable. And again, if you know your history as a people coming from Africa, and like I said earlier, Africa I'm going to talk about a little bit in depth later in this broadcast. But if you know your people, if you know what we've done historically from nothing, even during and just after slavery, if you knew what we did before slavery, because our story just doesn't begin with slavery, we built the world before slavery. If you know that, it will help you gain the self-esteem you need to power through those classes. Is science difficult? Yeah. Yeah, it is. But hitting a jump shot isn't necessarily easy either. You practice hard at it and you do it. So that tells me that it's not the topic, it's the accessory things that are either there or not there. And you go for the things that have the greater accessories. If you could hit a jump shot well, you might could make an MBA where you could have nice cars, a lot of women, this, that, and the third. If you could synthesize a chemical in chemistry very well, you won't see those things that LeBron sees, or Jordan saw, or Magic. And that's the problem. So you're going after the life that you see those guys living. You're going after the life of a 50 Cent or Kendrick Lamar or who have you. So once again, we got to work on ourselves first. We're in a system that's setting things up for us to go a certain direction. And that's just the truth of the matter. This system, and this is what a lot of black folks refuse to acknowledge, because a lot of black folks are on this morality, good and evil type thing. They refuse to acknowledge that there's some fuckers so wicked out here that they will create a system in that you do have a choice to do or to not do, but the choice to do something bad is very easy and it's more accessible to you than the choice of doing something good. As a side note, I was listening to something recently about Chicago, and people were talking once again about how in Chicago, or the Chi, in some of those neighborhoods where a lot of violence is going on, you'll wake up in the morning and there will be a box or two loaded with guns and ammunition and stuff like that. Now, you probably heard the old saying, if you're a hungry man, you're an angry man. If you're in a bad situation, yeah, you could choose not to pick up those guns. And I advise the youth out there to stop falling for the trick. But it's so easy to say, man, this gun is here. Let me pick it up. I could rob a dude and I could eat. My family could eat. We'll live to see another day. And it's not right. And I'm advocating for more black excellency. I'm advocating for you to say, fuck that, and kick those guns to the curb and leave them right where they are. But this is how the system works. The system works in a way where it makes one choice over the other much easier for you to make. And that's the same thing going on in this topic of STEM education. The system makes it easier for you to go after the basketball and all this stuff. That takes work to do too, but you're not seeing the hard work in being a great basketball player or a great rapper or whatever. You're just seeing, or a great beat maker, you're just seeing the nigger trinkets, as Star from Star and Buck Wild would say. You're just seeing those little things, and that will make you work hard and not even think about the hard work you're doing. And all for what? All for what? To be a $40 million slave. Because that's what you're going to be. And what you're going to be doing doesn't bring back any economics to your larger community at all. So we have to wisen up. We have to look at these children and wisen them up as well. On the other side of the bump, of the break, we are going to talk about how the few of us who have been in the STEM field, we're going to talk about how the few of us face racism. So we're going to talk about the system again on the other side of the break.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAC Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. We are trying to break it down tonight about STEM education and its importance in the black community. We talked about how it has increased the U.S. economy since World War II. We talked about some of the ways we self-sabotage ourselves from entering that arena, an arena that could actually bring up black status, not just here in America, but around the world. We talked about in the last segment how the system stacks it against you and makes it difficult for you to choose STEM over rap, R&B, sports, things of that nature, entertainment. But in this segment, I want to talk about how the few black folks who actually advance through the ranks and who actually enter the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, mathematics field, I want to speak to you about how they feel, how those workers feel in the industry. Half of black STEM workers report being treated as incompetent because of their race. So remember in the previous segment I said only half of the graduates, of black graduates who are in STEM areas, only half of them get jobs with the big tech companies, and how the other half usually tend to either switch fields or go into teaching, which doesn't look good to our children and further discourages them more from wanting to enter the STEM field from an economic standpoint. Well, half of that 2% is treated like they're incompetent, and treated as being incompetent by who? White and Asian males. 40% of black folks who are in STEM are reporting that race makes it harder to succeed in the field. Only 30% of Asians feel that way. Only 20% of Hispanics feel that way, and only a whopping 5% of whites feel that way. 40% of us in the STEM industry are reporting that race makes it harder to succeed in the field. 60% of us who have worked in the field or who are working in the field report some form of racial bias at work. Like I said, they're treated incompetent, or they're paid significantly less than the other non-blacks around them doing the same job. I mean, think of these numbers. These are high numbers. 40% are reporting that race makes it hard in the field. 60% are reporting some type of racial bias, either being treated like they're incompetent or they're being paid significantly less for the same job that other non-blacks are doing. "75% of blacks say the major reason blacks are underrepresented in STEM is due to discrimination in the recruiting process, in the hiring process, and in promotions." And when you talk about hiring and promotions, and even recruiting for the most part, who's doing those things? It's non-black folks who are shutting out at every stage of gaining employment or entering these STEM fields. There's a gatekeeper, a white one, an Asian one, a man, who is keeping you out. systematically keeping you out. And they're claiming that it's your education, what school you went to. They're claiming, that you're incompetent. Now, we know full well as black folks that we have to work twice as hard at anything we do, especially when it comes to things of an academic nature. But still, the gatekeepers keep us out. So what does that say to us about us? We need to become the gatekeepers. We need to start entering these arenas in larger numbers. What I said earlier, and this happened to me, working in a lab. I had a conflict with a white coworker. Who did I have to sit before, in front of, for there to be some conflict resolution? And potentially there could have been some, what do they call it again? Well, for lack of the word right now, some punishment. I had to sit in front of 2 or 3 white folks. Not a Negro in sight. Not even a mirror for me to look at myself and think there's another Negro in the room. This is not good. We're underrepresented. We have a system that's trying its damnedest to keep us out, and it's trying to keep us out from their shit. But if we built our own shit from a science and technology standpoint, we don't have to worry about who keeps us out. We have enough things going on in the black community that we can do research and development on in our community. And I'm speaking to you black doctors and stuff out there too, because there's a lot of y'all who push and become these black doctors and black nurses, but particularly you black doctors. It's time for you guys to turn that shit around and start looking into healing your people specifically. And not the way Europeans healed, quote unquote, heal themselves by just suppressing the symptoms or something. Like, really start looking into how can we deal with diabetes. And I'm not just talking about, you lose weight and stuff like that and you diet well. Yeah, we know that stuff. Dr. Sebi gave us the blueprint for that stuff. I can attest to what Dr. Sebi spoke of. But people who are really doing some genetics research, really doing some cell and molecular research, we have to be better. We have to stand tall more. We have to get involved more for our group. Like I said, buy black, sell to everyone else. I'm not telling you not to, open your practices and stuff to other folks, but it has to be black first. Because everyone else is doing them first. We're going to take a quick station ID here, and on the other side, I'm going to conclude this with the larger picture. Stay tuned.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAC Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Today we're talking about the lack of black representation in the STEM field. That's the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field. The thesis for this podcast is the fact that STEM, if you look at the STEM field as it relates to the United States as a whole, it's responsible for over half of the economic growth since World War II. Then if that's true, if we started to practice more STEM implementation into the black community, that is, get more of our people in those sciences, in engineering, in mathematics, we too can increase the economic standing of the black community within the larger U.S. community or population. But as you know, this show and I are Pan-African nationalists. So we're not just looking at America here, but we're looking at it from a global perspective. We're looking and thinking about Africa as well. When you consider Africa holds so much resources that are mined and used in all of the technology that's being, and all of the innovation that you see coming out of America all the time. It's the basis of it. We need our African brothers and sisters to also get on the STEM train. We need you guys more than ever, more than any, to be in these STEM fields and flooding these spaces. In America, blacks make up 13%. What percent of black Africans are there in all of the whole continent of Africa? Particularly those countries within the continent that a lot of these resources that are central to innovation in America and in Europe are coming from. I want to play a clip for you guys. I want to play a clip for you to listen to. Take a listen to this, guys. It's about a 4-minute clip. This is for fair use. This is for critique and commentary. I want you to listen to this.
I think that Africa is at a point of opportunity. Africa has no automatic future. Africa is not on autopilot to some gilded age, as a lot of people seem to think. What is being rather prematurely, perhaps you might even say falsely, celebrated as Africa's rise is simply the continent having become a playground for globalization. That's a different thing from a continent rising. So now where we are, clearly Africa can rise. Nobody's questioning that. But how can it rise? And so the decisions we take today in African countries are what will determine whether in 30, 40 years Africa is closer to where it should be or farther away from it. For example, what are we doing about population growth? What are we doing about jobless growth? If you don't do anything serious about these challenges, 30, 40 years, you'll have a continent whose population may have doubled, but in which you have armies of young people who do not have gainful employment. This could create social problems. If you create jobs faster than population growth, you will not have this problem. If you create skills and human capital that balances out the growth of the population, you will not have this problem, because then you avoid the Malthusian dilemma, in which the more the population grows, the more the strain on the Earth's resources, becomes exacerbated. But if you create the population with the skills, they will produce more with less. They will be able to use high-yielding crop seeds to develop lots more food. And so you have food security over smaller acres of land. So that population increase is not having a negative impact. And that's why, Robert Malthus, the economist who formulated this theory, I say he would die of shock if he were alive today, because Western societies have beaten the dilemma that he so clearly sketched out. But the reason they were able to beat it is because Western societies embraced science and technology and its application through innovation. That's the secret of prosperity, and that's what Africa must engage. The roadmap I see for Africa's future is the roadmap I have established in this book, Imagine Africa. I think, first of all, Africa needs to understand that ideas matter, that ideas create realities, that they can change the environment through the way they think. It's important for Africans to think far more long-term than short-term. There's too much short-term thinking going on in Africa today. Not enough long-term strategic thinking, let alone the discipline to execute the product of strategy. So this is a fundamental requirement for Africa's economic transformation. It has not yet been embraced. And there's no need for us to kid ourselves that it has. And my book is a realistic appraisal of this whole subject. So that's one. The second is that developing that organizational principle, that ability to actually execute plans, it is so important. This means building up value systems of discipline in African societies. The third is that, of course, the art of governance, which is currently evolving in the continent, needs to be developed even further. It's an evolutionary process. It's much better than it used to be at some points in the past. But this process needs to continue. Building institutions is absolutely critical to a successful roadmap for Africa's future.
And there you have it. There you have it. Listen to what the brother said, and he mentioned his book. You can check it out. I haven't yet. I just saw this clip the other day, and I began thinking about, what we've been discussing here today. He used the term globalization. All that means is Europeans fucking with your shit. All that means is Europeans coming in your country and fucking with your shit. He talked about agriculture, which I hadn't talked about this whole time. That's a part of innovation. That's a part of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's science. Where you could have innovation that counteracts the population growth, that's what you want. In fact, that's the whole essence of building your economy, because your innovation is outperforming your population growth, so there's a surplus when it comes to economics and the people. And the thing I really like that he said in here, that I think more black folks in Africa and outside of it and around the world need to understand and need to really start to take to heart, ideas matter. I love basketball. I love watching it, love playing it. I love sports, period. But if we're keeping it real, a basketball game ain't going to change nothing for us. You could win 12 of those championships straight. That ain't going to change nothing for us as a group. That's just more or less a distraction from what's really going on. So, ideas matter. Tell that to your children tonight, tomorrow, the day after, and forever. Ideas matter. And I'm going to tell you something real. Ideas matter more than a degree. Because if you study, and I think I've talked about this in a podcast before, if you look at the big innovators, in fact, not only the innovators, if you look at the richest men in and around America, most of them are college dropouts. But what did they have? They had an idea. And they had the thoroughness to follow through with the idea and to enlist other smart folks who could bring the idea to fruition. Black people, ideas matter. Start to become an ideas type of people. Your ideas can create your reality. So if you start thinking about black empowerment, you can realize black empowerment in reality. And the next great thing he said in that 4-minute clip was that the African tends to think short term far too often. We got to be long-term thinkers. You guys who are trying to break into the league and this, that, break into the rap game or even to the street game, what happens when you get injured? What happens if you lose your voice? That happened to the DOC. For those of you who are old enough to remember, when Dr. Dre and them were doing their thing. In fact, I think, he was in the movie Straight Outta Compton. There's a scene and they show you how he ran to a tree or something like that. The DOC lost his voice. And dudes who are up on hip-hop will tell you the DOC seemed to be like he was going to be a big-timer in the game, in the rap game. Lost his voice. In recent years, I saw him in some interview talking about his voice was coming back, and I listened to him, and he sounded the same fucked up voice that he's had since the 90s. So it sounds like he was hoping that it was coming back. But seriously, what happens if you lose that special ability, that lottery ability that you have, that not everyone has? What happens if you lose that? That's why ideas matter, and you have to stop thinking in the short term. In the short term, you want to make it to the NBA, but what happens after? And by the way, most people retire from the NBA and from sports and even from music and stuff. They become washed up in the game really by 40. What if you live till 80, 90, 100? So I will leave you with that clip to play again. But black folks, let's get into sciences more. Let's unify under the banner of science more. Let's get into science. Let it build our economy by remembering that we're black first and we're here for black people. Let's get into the idea of thinking more instead of just doing. And doing stuff that's only good or mostly good for the short term. And on my final note, let me say this to you too. We have a problem in black society where we make every new generation start from scratch. That's why what the gentleman said there about Africans thinking in the short term is problematic. I agree. We have a bad habit that every child that's born from us has to start from scratch and has to find their own way, has to, learn that there's racism in the world. When you're black, I should have told them there's racism in the world. What to look out for. We stand by and watch our sons and our daughters build little home studios or go by the homeboy with a home studio and a notepad writing rhymes, knowing full well how many people we knew before us was singing on street corners and trying to break in to the music industry and couldn't do it. We know full well the number of guys who could have ball out on the park and they make it nowhere. And we still stand by and watch these boys spend all their time looking at, magazines with ball players and trying to emulate this guy and talking about LeBron all day and all this stuff. And we know full well the chances of you making it is slim. It's not to say you can't do those things, but also think long term. This has been Koku bringing this topic to you today. I will talk to you guys again on Sunday.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.